Hello, class, and welcome back as we wrap up this chapter on the age of absolutism by talking about the end of the English Civil War and the period of restoring the monarchy, better known as the Restoration. So, note that the root word of restoration is to restore. So, after the English Civil War, we end up with Oliver Cromwell essentially forming a dictatorship in England. The Restoration is really going to mark the return to the British monarchy. So, just to revisit where we were previously, we had the execution of King Charles I, right? The first time that a monarch had been publicly executed before their citizens, and really a catalyst moving into this era of revolutions that's just around the corner, where peasantry and poor people will rise up against aristocrats due to poor living conditions. So Cromwell ultimately forms a new model army under the leadership of Parliament. It's a professional army that's extremely disciplined. They carried around, detailed pamphlets and books that outlined their regimented routines, and they were largely guided by the Bible as well. So there was no drinking, cursing, gambling, no women. Promotions were based on merit, not class. And again, they had these very strong Puritan values. So they were fighting for a cause that they vehemently believed in. But a lot of this ideology is going to make for a very poor social atmosphere in England after the Civil War comes to an end. So once Charles I is killed, Cromwell becomes the ruler. Technically, England becomes a republic, but it's not quite what it seems. In reality, even though Cromwell is deemed Lord Protector of this republic, he likens himself to a dictator, right? Power begets power. And he basically enforces laws that people abhor. He enforces blue laws, which are basically like sanctions on when you can shop, where you can shop, or all sorts of like social restrictions that make life very frustrating. He cancels Christmas because he deems it to be a holiday of gluttoness and like commercialism rather than one worshiping the Lord. He outlaws dancing, theater, gambling, vices that many people turn to that may seem bad, but they also control the social order and they control people. And by taking them away, it causes a lot of anger and hostility. Any Catholic disobeyers who do not adhere to the laws set out by Cromwell are many times murdered. One hotly debated topic from this time period is the Irish Rebellion. Catholics, in many cases, allied themselves with the Royalists, those who were supporting Charles I, and there were many rumors of plots in Ireland to help restore a Catholic monarch. Basically, Cromwell moves in, and conditions are absolutely horrifying. Historians debate today if this would be considered a genocide. Between 15 to 25% of the Irish population is lost because of these poor conditions. A great deal of famine, a strain of the Black Death, mass slaughter at the hands of the New Model Army, and also Cromwell not sending needed food to Ireland to support the public. And the question becomes about genocide. Is not sending that food an intentional way of destroying the population, murdering them, or is that within the rules of war during this time period? Just to show you, this is Ireland during the time. This maps out some of the regions of conflict and settlement during this time period. So, transitioning forward, Cromwell is going to rule until his death in 1658. The people are sick of his rule and his dictatorship and all of these restrictions, so they actually want to return to a king again. So, they ask King Charles I's son to return to England to be the next king, and people are jubilant when he returns. He returns to cheers and excited greetings. It's interesting that Charles II, as he will come to be known, wants to come back after experiencing what he did as a child and his father being decapitated publicly. But again, people do interesting things for power. So this is known as the Restoration, again, because the root word is to restore. The monarchy is essentially restored here. Charles II has been nicknamed the Merry Monarch, and in many ways his rule was better than his father and his grandfather's. He limits the monarch's power, gives more control to Parliament, He implements what's called habeas corpus, right, to give something body, which means that you can't just arrest someone on a whim. Prisoners must be told why they are being arrested or commandeered. They must be given a fair trial, a speedy trial, one where their peers are evaluating their crimes, not a monarch or a dictator. But the thing is, Charles II has no son, so the next person in line would be his brother James II, who is not quite as well liked by the public. And you can see him pictured over there on the right. James II was vehemently Catholic, and he starts appointing a lot of Catholics to office. You can see where this is going. Again, we have a lot of Puritans and Protestants in Parliament, so they're going to protest a lot of the decisions that James makes. James has a young son with his second wife, who would be James III, and Parliament largely freaks out. And they're terrified of having this long line of, kings again who will not cooperate with them, who are Catholic. So what ultimately happens is they turn to James's daughter from his first marriage, a girl named Mary. She's a Protestant, and she's married to William Orange, who is the Prince of the Netherlands during the time, both of them being Protestants. So Parliament asks William and Mary, the namesake of the college, William and Mary, to overthrow James II. James flees to France, putting up very little fight, and this is oftentimes referred to as the Glorious Revolution because we end up with Protestants in control of England again. And William and Mary are among the most forward-thinking of the English monarchs. They implement a lot of policies that will actually inspire a lot of the advancements and progress made during the American Revolution. They declare themselves equal to Parliament. It's going to be a constitutional monarchy, not an absolute monarchy, meaning that the power of the king and queen are bound by the document that is the Constitution. There are certain freedoms established that the monarch could never take away. This is in the English Bill of Rights from 1689. The king and queen cannot suspend Parliament's laws. They can't tax without Parliament, and they can't interfere in freedom of speech. They can't take away people's personal liberties the same way that an absolute monarch would. So just to wrap things up, we also have a cabinet system developing as well, just to better flesh out what Parliament is capable of, much like we have in the United States government in our Congress, in our legislative branch. The cabinet is basically officials who are at the highest levels of Parliament, and they are made up of the majority party during that time. The head of the cabinet would be the prime minister. So a lot of those ideas, again, will be echoed in the formation of the U.S. government after our Constitution is signed, with the Senate and the House of Representatives, right, with the Senate Majority Leader, and a lot of those different components will be directly inspired from what happens in England. Just a little bit of summary before we wrap up this chapter about the monarchs. First, we talked about King Henry VIII and his 6 wives, right, resulting in 3 different children who will all go on to rule. Edward, who dies, Mary, aka Bloody Mary, who also dies, Elizabeth, who has no children, who also dies, and then it goes over to her cousin, the next in line, James I. You can see the crowns denote those who actually served as a monarch. Charles tries to replicate the same absolutism, right, that his father had, and it results in the English Civil War and Oliver Cromwell becoming the next ruler of England. But then we have the Restoration, where the monarchy is restored. Charles II becomes king, has no heirs. James II becomes king, his brother, and Parliament becomes alarmed at having a long line of Catholic kings, so they turn to his daughter, Queen Mary II, right, because we had Mary I. So she would become Queen Mary II, who's married to William Orange, and they become William and Mary, the first to be a constitutional monarchy in the Glorious Revolution, because no one is killed in the conflict. So that's going to wrap us up for the Age of Absolutism. Where we are heading next is the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment is largely going to be a byproduct of this time period. People reflecting back on this period of oppression and cruel monarchies, and reflecting on what a government should be and what role people, common people, should have in it. Do they have the right to overthrow a government that is cruel and oppressive? Those are all questions that will be answered going forward.